If you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you have come to the right place. Because that is all we do here. We upload new stories every single week. So, if that is of interest to you, please offer to help the like button paint their living room. But instead of paint, use invisible ink and tell them it looks minimalist, then charge them double and block their number. Also, please subscribe and turn on all notifications. We are closing our session today with the most bizarre case in the history of South America. Now, before we get into today's story, I want you to just take a second, sit back, grab your final cup of coffee for the day, make it black, make it strong, because we are going to a place where logic goes to die. Are you ready? Good. Let's get into it. Imagine it is August 17th, 1966. You are in Niter, Brazil. You are one of two men, Manuel Pereira de Cruz or Miguel Jose Viana. You are both electronic technicians. You are smart. You are practical. You deal with circuits and wires. And when the police arrive, they realize that death was just the beginning of the mystery. Now, I want you to imagine the pure confusion of the investigators. When the police reach the top of that hill, they are looking for a crime. They are looking for blood. They are looking for a struggle. But they find nothing. You and your friend are lying there peacefully. Your hands are at your sides. Your suits are still sharp. There are no signs of violence. No footprints around the bodies except your own. But then, the investigators look at your eyes, or where your eyes should be. They lift the heavy, crude, lead masks. They were cut by hand from a sheet of lead. The logic of a technician says these masks were made to protect against a blinding light, a light that is not from this world. But here is the part that defies all medical science. The coroner performs an autopsy. He is looking for poison. He is looking for the capsules mentioned in your note. But the toxicology report comes back inconclusive. Why? Because your internal organs are perfectly healthy. There is no sign of struggle, no sign of heart failure, no sign of trauma. It is as if your souls were simply vacuumed out of your bodies. The police search your workshop back home. They find more lead and a book about scientific spiritualism. The logic starts to take a dark turn. You weren't just technicians. You were part of a secret group that believed you could use electronics to contact beyond. You believed that at 18 to 30, at that specific spot on the hill, a portal would open. The capsules weren't poison. They were meant to expand your consciousness. And the masks? They were there to protect you from the radiation of the visitors. But then, a witness comes forward, a woman named Gracinda Barbosa. She was driving past the hill at the exact time the note said to wait for the signal. She didn't see two men in raincoats. She saw an object. She described it as a multicolored, glowing disc hovering directly above the spot where you were lying. If the logic of science says you died of natural causes, then why did the grass underneath your bodies turn yellow and die in a perfect circular pattern? And why did your watches both stop at the exact same second? Now, let's look at the hidden logic behind your workshop doors. The police didn't just find lead in your house. They found a secret laboratory. You and your friend weren't just fixing televisions. You were building something that science says is impossible. Neighbors reported that for weeks they heard high-pitched screeching sounds coming from your garage. They saw flashes of blue light in the middle of the night. You were trying to tune into a frequency that doesn't exist on any radio dial. The logic of the investigators was simple. They were crazy. But then, they found the receipts. You had been spending huge amounts of money on high-voltage components and strange, radioactive materials. Why would two simple technicians need material that is used in nuclear reactors? And then, there is the money. When you left for the hill, you were carrying a large amount of cash, enough to buy a car. But when the police found your bodies, the money was gone. But your wallets were still in your pockets. Your expensive watches were still on your wrists. A thief would have taken the watches. A thief would have taken the jewelry. But the money vanished as if it had been traded. Think about the instructions in your notebook again. Protect metals. Wait for the mask signal. In physics, lead is used to block X-rays and gamma radiation. If you were expecting a signal, you were expecting something so powerful vanished. A report emerged from the former Soviet Union. It claimed that a group of scientists had discovered a metallic plate in a remote mountain range, and on that plate was a message. The message was written in English. It was a plea for help. It was signed, Frederick Valentic. Now, the logic of the world says this is a hoax, a cruel joke. How could a pilot from Australia end up in a Soviet mountain range, leaving messages on metallic plates? It's impossible. But the family of Frederick, they don't care about logic anymore. His father, Guido Valentic, spent every day of the rest of his life staring at the ocean. He believed, until his final breath, that his son was not dead. He believed Frederick had been borrowed by something from somewhere else. Think about those 17 seconds of metallic scratching one more time. Modern sound analysts have looked at that audio. They say it doesn't sound like a crash. It sounds like a can opener peeling back the roof of a car. It sounds like a hull being opened. The Australian Department of Transport eventually closed the file. Their official conclusion? Cause unknown. But for those of us who look at the facts, the conclusion is much more disturbing. If Frederick was disoriented, where is the plane? If he ran away to start a new life, how did he do it? In the middle of the ocean, with no radar seeing him leave. The logic points to a hole in our understanding of the universe. So tonight, when you are outside and you see a light moving across the stars, do not just assume It is a satellite. Do not just assume it is a commercial flight heading to Sydney, because on October 21st, 1978, Frederick Valentik saw a light, and he followed the rules. He called for help. He stayed on the radio, and all it got him was an eternity in the dark. The sky is a very big place, and sometimes the things that fly in it are not looking for a runway. They are looking for you. If you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you have come to the right place. Because on this channel, we don't just tell stories. We dissect the moment where human ambition crosses the line into a fatal mechanical failure. So, if you're ready to step into a world made of air and plastic that was never meant to touch the sky, please offer to help the like button secure their garden tent. But while they're reaching for the stakes, replace all the ropes with strands of spider silk. Tell them, the wind is your friend now, and then disappear before the first breeze hits the trees. Also, please subscribe and turn on all notifications, because in a structure held together by pressure, one single breath can be the difference between a dream and a funeral. Now, settle in. Feel the weight of the air in the room. Grab your coffee and listen closely, because today, we aren't talking about a haunted house or a secret government bunker. We are talking about an art exhibit, a masterpiece of color and light that was designed to bring peace and serenity to the world. But as we are about to see, the logic of good enough is the most dangerous logic of all. Imagine it is July 23rd, 20-06. You are in Riverside Park in Chesterley Street, England. The sun is shining. The park is full of families. And in the center of the green, there is something that looks like it was dropped from another dimension. It is called Dream Space. It's a massive, sprawling network of interconnected rooms, half the size of a professional soccer field. It's made of 2,500 square meters of PVC, the same plastic used for shower curtains. Inside, it's a labyrinth of glowing colors and ambient music. It is a liminal space, a place between reality and a dream. The creator is Maurice Agus, a 74-year-old artist who has spent 40 years preparing for this moment. This is his legacy, his exclamation point. But on this morning, Maurice is frustrated. The exhibit was supposed to open hours ago. There are technical hiccups. The staff is rushing. The line of people outside is getting long and angry. Maurice looks at the structure. He sees that several of the heavy-duty anchor points, the massive ropes designed to keep this plastic mountain pinned to the earth, are not yet secured. Now, think about the pneumatic logic. A structure this size, filled with air, acts like a giant sail. It is subject to the laws of lift and drag. Even a light breeze hitting that much surface area creates tons of upward force. But Maurice is a perfectionist who is running out of time. He sees the people waiting. He sees his career reaching its peak. And he makes a decision that defies every rule of safety. He tells his staff to stop. He says the anchors they have already installed are good enough. He tells them to open the doors. Among the first people to walk inside is 68-year-old Elizabeth Collins and her 14-year-old grandson. They are mesmerized. They move through the blue rooms, the green rooms, feeling the soft plastic floors beneath their feet. Elizabeth feels her body relax. She is immersed in the serenity. But then, the wind picks up. Just a light summer breeze. Suddenly, a deafening snap echoes through the park. It's the sound of the few remaining anchors being ripped out of the soil like toothpicks. Inside the blue room, Elizabeth suddenly feels a floating sensation. She looks down and realizes her feet are no longer touching the ground. She isn't walking anymore. She is ascending. The dream has just turned into a projectile. Now, let's look at the kinetic nightmare of what happened at 3:15 p.m. When that final anchor snapped, the logic of gravity was replaced by the logic of flight. Dream Space was no longer an art exhibit. It had become a 2,500 square meter kite, fueled by a light breeze that had suddenly found a way to get under the plastic skin. Inside the structure, Elizabeth Collins and dozens of other visitors didn't just feel a tilt. They felt the world invert. Imagine, you are at a room with no windows, only glowing colorful walls. Suddenly, the floor beneath you becomes the ceiling. The gravity that held you safe is gone. You are being tossed against the PVC walls like a doll in a washing machine. And as the structure climbed higher, reaching 30 feet, the height of a 3-story building, the physics of the inflatable began to disintegrate. Because the exhibit wasn't anchored at the back, the wind began to twist the plastic. It started to wring the structure like a wet towel, and as it twisted, the air pressure inside began to spike, forcing the exit flaps and the seams to burst open. On the ground, Maurice Agus and the horrified crowd watched in a state of paralysis. They weren't just looking at a balloon. They were looking at a sky burial in progress. Witnesses reported seeing human shapes pressed hard against the translucent plastic from the inside. They saw hands clawing at the yellow and red walls, trying to find a way out before the structure hit the power lines nearby. And then, the ejection began. As Dream Space contorted in the wind, it began to spit people out through the ruptured seams. One witness described it as watching fruit fall from a tree. But it wasn't fruit. It was human beings falling 30 feet onto the hard, unforgiving grass of Riverside Park. Think about the traumatic logic for the people still inside. Elizabeth Collins was trapped in a section that was folding in on itself. As the structure struck a metal pole, the plastic tore open completely. In a split second, the serenity of the blue room was replaced by the cold, rushing air of the English summer. Elizabeth was thrown out into the void. She didn't fall into water. She didn't fall onto a safety net. She fell onto the very ground, where, just 10 minutes earlier, she had been enjoying a peaceful walk with her grandson. But the most haunting detail for the investigators who arrived later wasn't the fall itself. It was the sound of the music. Even as the structure lay crumpled on the ground like a dead, colorful skin, even as the screams of the 27 injured victims filled the park, the hidden speakers inside the wreckage were still playing. The dreamy, ambient, meditative music continued to echo through the blood-stained plastic, a soundtrack of peace for a scene of absolute carnage. The logic of the artist had survived the crash, but the people had not. When the emergency services began to cut through the PVC to find the survivors, they realized that the dream had become a vacuum trap. The collapsing plastic was so heavy and so airtight that those who weren't killed by the fall were now suffocating inside their own masterpiece. Now, let's look at the criminal logic that emerged during the trial of Maurice Agus. In the aftermath of the disaster, as the colorful plastic of Dream Space was hauled away in pieces, the police didn't just find a broken artwork. They found a crime scene. The investigation turned from a tragic accident into a full-scale forensic audit of Maurice Agus's decision-making process. And what they found challenged the very definition of responsibility. Investigators discovered that the structure was designed to be held down by 80 distinct anchor points. 80. But on the afternoon of July 23rd, when the wind hit the park at only 12 miles per hour, more than half of those anchors were missing. Now, think about the mechanical logic. A structure this light, essentially a giant sail, requires absolute symmetry in its tension. If you anchor the front but leave the back loose, you aren't building a building. You are building a lever. When the wind got under the loose rear section, it didn't just lift it. It used the anchored front as a hinge, snapping the remaining ropes with a force equivalent to several tons of pressure. But the most damning piece of evidence was a conversation that took place just 1 hour before the doors opened. A member of the safety staff had approached Maurice and warned him. They told him the wind was picking up. They told him the rear anchors weren't deep enough in the soil. But Maurice's logic was blinded by ego. He had spent his entire life working toward this moment. He saw the line of paying customers. He saw the success of the hammering within his grasp. He reportedly brushed off the warning, saying he was a perfectionist, but that the current setup was good enough. Think about that phrase. Good enough. In the world of structural engineering, good enough is another word for fatal. During the trial at Newcastle Crown Court, the prosecution painted a picture of an artist who had become a rogue engineer. They revealed that Dream Space had suffered minor liftoff incidents in previous cities, specifically in Germany and earlier in the UK. The warning signs had been there for years. The structure had screamed at Maurice that it was unstable, but instead of redesigning the safety system, he simply ignored the data. The court heard how the victims, including Elizabeth Collins, were essentially trapped in a plastic cage with no way to escape once the lift began. There were no emergency exits that functioned under high-altitude tension. The logic of peace and serenity had been built on a foundation of pure volatility. When the jury looked at the photos of the crumpled, blood-stained plastic, they didn't see an artist. They saw a man who had gambled with human lives to protect his reputation. Maurice Agus was convicted of negligence. He was fined. He was humiliated. But the real, psychological verdict came from Maurice himself. He sat in the courtroom, a broken 74-year-old man, listening to the descriptions of Elizabeth's final moments. He realized that his masterpiece, the thing he wanted to be remembered for, would now only be known as the killer balloon. He made a vow in that courtroom that haunted the local art world. He promised he would never create again. But as the case closed, a new, more disturbing detail surfaced from the survivors. Several people who were inside the structure when it lifted claimed that just before the snap, the colors of the rooms began to shift into patterns that shouldn't have been possible with the lighting system. They claimed that for a few seconds, they weren't in a park in England anymore. They were in a liminal void where the logic of the earth no longer applied. Now, let's look at the criminal logic that emerged during the trial of Maurice Agus. In the aftermath of the disaster, as the colorful plastic of dream space was hauled away in pieces, the police didn't just find a broken artwork. They found a crime scene. The investigation turned from a tragic accident into a full-scale forensic audit of Maurice Agus's decision-making process. And what they found challenged the very definition of responsibility. Investigators discovered that the structure was designed to be held down by 80 distinct anchor points. 80. But on the afternoon of July 23rd, when the wind hit the park at only 12 miles per hour, more than half of those anchors were missing. Now, think about the mechanical logic. A structure this light, essentially a giant sail, requires absolute symmetry in its tension. If you anchor the front but leave the back loose, you aren't building a building. You are building a lever. When the wind got under the loose rear section, it didn't just lift it. It used the anchored front as a hinge, snapping the remaining ropes with a force equivalent to several tons of pressure. But the most damning piece of evidence was a conversation that took place just 1 hour before the doors opened. A member of the safety staff had approached Maurice and warned him. They told him the wind was picking up. They told him the rear anchors weren't deep enough in the soil. But Maurice's logic was blinded by ego. He had spent his entire life working toward this moment. He saw the line of paying customers. He saw the success of the hammering within his grasp. He reportedly brushed off the warning, saying he was a perfectionist, but that the current setup was good enough. Think about that phrase. Good enough. In the world of structural engineering, good enough is another word for fatal. During the trial at Newcastle Crown Court, the prosecution painted a picture of an artist who had become a rogue engineer. They revealed that Dream Space had suffered minor liftoff incidents in previous cities, specifically in Germany and earlier. In the UK, the warning signs had been there for years. The structure had screamed at Maurice that it was unstable, but instead of redesigning the safety system, he simply ignored the data. The court heard how the victims, including Elizabeth Collins, were essentially trapped in a plastic cage with no way to escape once the lift began. There were no emergency exits that functioned under high-altitude tension. The logic of peace and serenity had been built on a foundation of pure volatility. When the jury looked at the photos of the crumpled, blood-stained plastic, they didn't see an artist. They saw a man who had gambled with human lives to protect his reputation. Maurice Agus was convicted of negligence. He was fined. He was humiliated. But the real, psychological verdict came from Maurice himself. He sat in the courtroom, a broken 74-year-old man, listening to the descriptions of Elizabeth's final moments. He realized that his masterpiece, the thing he wanted to be remembered for, would now only be known as the killer balloon. He made a vow in that courtroom that haunted the local art world. He promised he would never create again. But as the case closed, a new, more disturbing detail surfaced from the survivors. Several people who were inside the structure when it lifted claimed that just before the snap, the colors of the rooms began to shift into patterns that shouldn't have been possible with the lighting system. They claimed that for a few seconds, they weren't in a park in England anymore. They were in a liminal void where the logic of the earth no longer applied. Now for the cold, final calculation of the dream space disaster. After the trial, after the fines, and after the world turned its back on him, Maurice Agus became a ghost in his own life. The logic of a 40-year career was gone. In its place was a singular, crushing reality. He had designed a sanctuary, but he had delivered a coffin. Friends of the artist reported that in his final years, Maurice couldn't look at a bright color without shaking. He couldn't hear ambient music without hearing the screams of Elizabeth Collins. He died in 20-09, exactly 3 years after his masterpiece took flight. Some say it was age, but those who knew him said his heart simply couldn't withstand the pressure of the guilt. But the anomaly of dream space didn't die with him. Think about the liminal logic of that structure. In the years since 20-06, people who have visited the site of the disaster in Riverside Park have reported a strange sensation. They claim that on quiet, sunny afternoons, when the wind is just right, you can still see the grass undulating, as if something invisible and massive is still resting there, trying to breathe. Some survivors of the flight, the people who were thrown 30 feet into the air, suffer from a specific kind of trauma. They don't dream of falling. They dream of ascending. They dream of a world where there is no floor, where the walls are made of translucent, glowing skin, and where a low, vibrating hum tells them that they are, finally, where they belong. The logic of our safety regulations tells us that this was just a technical error, a failure of ropes and stakes. But the logic of the strange tells us something else. It tells us that when we build structures designed to disconnect us from reality, when we create spaces that have no corners, no windows, and no shadows, we are inviting the void to move in. Maurice Agus wanted to give the world a dream, but he forgot that a dream is only a dream as long as it stays inside your head. The moment you try to inflate it into the physical world, you have to be ready for the nightmare to wake up to. Today, dream space exists only in grainy police photos and suppressed video footage. It is a warning to every creator and every dreamer. The logic of good enough is a death sentence. And the next time you walk into a colorful, peaceful room with no windows, and the music starts to play, and you feel your body begin to relax, just do one thing for me. Look down, check your feet, and make sure they are still touching the ground, because the wind is always watching. If you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you have come to the right place, because that is all we do here. We upload new stories every single week. So, if that is of interest to you, please offer to help the like button fix their computer, but then accidentally delete their entire operating system and replace it with a 24-hour loop of Baby Shark, then block their number and disappear into the night. Also, please subscribe and turn on all notifications so you do not miss any of our weekly uploads. Now, before we get into today's story, I want you to just take a second, sit back. Really lean back into your chair. Let the weight of the world leave your shoulders. Grab yourself a fresh cup of coffee, make it black, make it strong, or maybe a handful of peanuts, because we are going to be here for a very long time. Today, we are looking at a story that challenges the very logic of the human soul. We like to think that evil is loud. We think evil is obvious. But today's story proves that sometimes evil is a quiet man in a small town who spends his weekends building a toy box. Are you ready? Good. Let's get into it. Imagine you are waking up. Your head is throbbing. It feels like someone has poured liquid lead into your skull. You try to move your hands, but they are heavy. You hear the sound of cold, unforgiving metal clinking against your wrists. You are not in your bed. You are not in your home. You are lying on a cold, surgical table. The room is pitch black. But then, a light flickers on. A single, harsh, fluorescent bulb. You look around. You are in a small, soundproof trailer. The walls are covered in foam, and hanging from the ceiling are tools. But they are not construction tools. They are tools of agony. Then you hear a sound, a mechanical, clicking sound. It is a tape recorder, and a voice, calm, flat, and terrifyingly polite, begins to speak. The voice says, "Hello, my name is David. Welcome to my toy box. You are probably wondering why you are here. In a moment, I am going to explain the rules. And the most important rule is that you are now my property." The logic of your existence just evaporated. You are in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. You are just walking to your car, and now you are the star of a nightmare. The voice on the tape continues for hours. It describes, in surgical detail, exactly what is going to happen to you. It tells you that no one can hear you scream. It tells you that the trailer is a masterpiece of engineering. It cost nearly $100,000 to build this temple of pain. But here is the part that defies all human understanding. David Parker Ray, the man behind the voice, was a respected member of the community. He worked for the state. He was a father. He was a good guy. But as you lie there, staring at the tape recorder, you realize that the good guy has been doing this for decades. And you are just the latest toy. But as the door to the trailer creaks open and a shadow falls over you, you realize there is something even more terrifying than David, because he is not alone. Think about the sick, twisted logic of a small town. In the town of truth or consequences, everyone knew David Parker Ray. He was a hard worker, a quiet man, a man who seemed completely harmless. But inside that toy box, you realize a reality that is far more terrifying. The shadow that walks into the room is not just David. There is a woman standing beside him. Her name is Cindy Hendy, David's girlfriend, and sometimes even his own daughter. Jessie Ray is involved. Think about that for a second. Logic tells us that a father should protect his daughter from the darkness. Logic tells us that a woman should have empathy for another woman who is suffering. But inside this trailer, that logic is dead. David doesn't just torture you alone. He turns your suffering into a family hobby. They stand there, looking at you as if you are not human. You are just an object, a weekend project. David begins to use his tools, while Cindy just watches, or worse, she helps. One thing that makes your skin crawl is how David maintains his equipment. Every knife, every surgical instrument, every electrical wire is perfectly organized. The room is very clean, very sterile. This isn't just madness. This is the professionalism of a psychopath. For days, or maybe weeks, you are trapped in a cycle of pain that never ends. David records everything. He wants to hear your voice over and over again while he is alone. But there is something strange. David often gives you drugs. He gives you a cocktail of chemicals that makes your memory fuzzy. He wants you to suffer, but he also wants you to forget. Why? Because David's logic is, if you forget, then his crime never happened. He could drop you off on the side of a road, and you would wake up with terrible pain, but with no memory of who did it. He has done this to dozens of women over the years. Many of them returned to normal lives, never knowing that they were once a toy in David's trailer. However, one morning, David makes a mistake. A tiny mistake that defies all the precision he built over 30 years. He leaves the keys within your reach. And that is when you realize this is your one and only chance to escape this hell or die inside this box. The logic of justice says that a monster like David Parker Ray should spend the rest of his life answering for his crimes. He should face every woman he ever broke. He should tell the world where the bodies are hidden. But the universe had a different plan. In 20-02, just before his trial for the kidnappings was about to reach its peak, David Parker Ray sat in his cell. He was facing hundreds of years in prison. He was 62 years old. And then his heart simply stopped. He died of a heart attack before he could ever be charged with a single murder Think about that. The man who spent 30 years meticulously planning the destruction of human lives died without ever revealing his greatest secrets. The FBI was left with a mountain of evidence, but no answers. They have those tapes, thousands of hours of audio, where David describes disposing of women in the desert sands or at the bottom of Elephant Butte Lake. But the lake is deep and the desert is vast. To this day, not a single body has ever been recovered. But here is the most chilling, logic-defying part of the story. Because David used drugs to erase the memories of his victims, the police believe there are women out there, right now, who are living normal lives. They are mothers, they are grandmothers, they are sisters. They might have a scar they don't explain. They might have a recurring nightmare of a dark trailer and a flat, polite voice. But they have no idea that they were once in the toy box. If you lived in New Mexico in the 80s or 90s, and you woke up one morning feeling sore, feeling confused, with a gap in your memory, you might be one of David's success stories. So, as we close this case, I want you to look at the people around you. We like to think we know the people in our town. We like to think we can spot a monster from a mile away. But David Parker Ray proved that evil can be a quiet neighbor with a well-kept lawn and a hobby in a soundproof trailer. Tonight, when you hear a mechanical clicking sound in the distance, or when you see a lone trailer parked in the dark out in the desert, do not go and investigate. Do not assume it is just a hobbyist at work, because some boxes are not meant to be opened, and some toys are never meant to be found. If you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you have come to the right place. Because that is all we do here. We upload new stories every single week. So, if that is of interest to you, please offer to help the like button water their plants. But instead of water, use liquid nitrogen. Then shatter their favorite ceramic pot and tell them it's for the aesthetic before walking out and never looking back. Also, please subscribe and turn on all notifications. You do not want to be the only person on earth who doesn't know what is coming next. Now, before we get into today's story, I want you to just take a second. Sit back, grab yourself a fresh cup of coffee, make it black, make it strong, because the logic of the map is about to dissolve. Are you ready? Good. Let's get into it. Imagine it is July of 1954. You are at Haneda Airport in Tokyo, Japan. It is a busy, humid, normal day. Hundreds of people are lining up at customs, showing their passports and going home. But then, a man walks up to the counter. He is dressed in a perfect suit. He looks like a successful businessman. He speaks French, but he also speaks Japanese and several other languages. He is polite. He is calm. The customs officer takes his passport, flips through the pages, and then he stops. The officer looks at the man. He looks back at the passport. He calls his supervisor. Why? Because the passport looks 100% official. It has the stamps of many countries. It looks real. It feels real. But the country listed on the cover is Toward. The officer shakes his head. He says, "Sir, there is no country called Toward." The man doesn't laugh. He doesn't look like he is joking. He looks insulted. He says, "What are you talking about? Taured has existed for over 1,000 years. It is between France and Spain." The officers pull out a world map. They point to the area between France and Spain, to the country we know as Andorra. The man looks at the map and his face turns white. He screams, "Where is Tord? Why is Andorra on this map? It should not be there." The logic of our world says this man is a prankster or he is crazy. But then things get much stranger. Now, I want you to feel the confusion that starts to crawl under your skin. You are standing in a small, windowless office in the heart of Tokyo's Haneda Airport. Across from you are two officers. They are holding your passport, a passport you have used for 10 years to travel the world. But they are telling you your home does not exist. You look at the map on the wall. You point to that spot between France and Spain. You know it is Taured. You were born there. You have a bank account there. You even have a driver's license issued by the Taured government. But the map says Andorra. The logic is breaking. You aren't just confused. You are terrified. You start to think maybe the whole world has gone crazy. The officers don't know what to do with you. You aren't a criminal. You have money. You have a business meeting at a major Japanese company. So they decide to hold you in a nearby hotel until they can clear up the mystery. They take you to a room on the 6th floor. They take your passport, your wallet, and your documents, and they lock them in the airport safe. 2 armed guards stand outside your door. There is no balcony. There is only one window, and it is reinforced glass that does not open. You sit on the bed. You are thinking about your wife, back in Taured. You are thinking about your office. You just want to go home. But here is where the story defies all laws of physics. The next morning, the officers return to your room. They knock. No answer. They use the master key, and they open the door. The room is empty. The bed is perfectly made. Your luggage is gone. The guards swear on their lives that the door never opened. The window is still locked from the inside. There is no way for a human being to leave that room without being seen. The officers are in a panic. They rush back to the airport to check the safe. They need to see your passport to find a clue. They open the safe, and their blood turns to ice. Your passport, your driver's license, every document you gave them has disappeared. Think about that. The safe was never opened. The room was guarded by armed men. It is as if you and everything you ever owned were simply snapped out of our reality. The Japanese police launched a massive search. They checked every hotel, every boat, every plane. But they found nothing. You, the man from Taured, were just gone. But years later, a new theory emerged. A theory that suggests you weren't a traveler from a different country. You were a traveler from a different dimension. Now, let's look at the cold, scientific nightmare of this situation. The logic of our world says that if something exists, it leaves a trace. But you, the man from Taured, left nothing. You vanished from a locked room, and your documents vanished from a locked safe at the exact same time. Think about the implications. Physicists today talk about the many worlds interpretation. The idea that there are infinite versions of Earth stacked on top of each other, like pages in a book. In one version, the country in the Pyrenees is called Andorra. In another version, it is called Tord. Now, imagine that for one split second, the pages of that book stuck together. You were walking through Haneda Airport in your world, and suddenly you stepped through a door that shouldn't have been there. You didn't realize you were in a different dimension until you looked at that map. The terror you felt wasn't just confusion. It was the biological realization that you were an alien in a world that looked exactly like yours, but was fundamentally wrong. But here is the part that challenges your very existence. Some researchers believe that this happens more often than we think. Have you ever lost your keys only to find them exactly where you already looked? Have you ever had a Mandela effect memory where you swear a movie line or a brand name was different? The logic says, your memory is just bad. But the story of the man from Taured suggests something darker. It suggests that our reality is fragile. It suggests that you could be sitting in your living room, drinking your coffee, and in the blink of an eye, you could be standing in a world where your house has never been built, where your parents never met, where you do not exist. The Japanese government eventually stopped talking about the case. They didn't want to admit that they had lost a man into thin air. They called it an unsolved mystery. But there is one final twist. A piece of information that surfaced years later from a witness who was in that hotel on the same night you disappeared. Now for the final twist that will make you look at your own front door with new, terrified eyes. Years later, a night porter who worked at that hotel finally spoke out. He said that on the night you vanished, he was walking past room 612, the room where you were being held. He didn't hear a struggle. He didn't hear a window breaking. He heard a humming sound, a low vibration that made the very air in the hallway feel heavy. And then he heard a voice, your voice. But you weren't screaming for help. You were whispering. You said, "It's not the same. Even the air tastes different." And then a flash of light, so fast it was like a camera bulb going off, leaked through the crack under your door. The porter was too scared to open it. But when the officers entered the next morning, the logic of the room was gone. There were no footprints, no fingerprints. Even the dust on the nightstand had been rearranged. It is as if the universe realized its mistake. It realized that an error had occurred and it simply deleted the file. You weren't just a man who got lost. You were a glitch, and the Matrix fixed itself. So, as you sit there tonight, finishing your coffee, I want you to do one thing. Go to your bookshelf or your kitchen drawer. Find something, anything, that proves you belong here. A birth certificate, a passport, an old photo of your childhood home. Look at it very closely. Is the name of your town spelled exactly how you remember? Is the color of your mother's eyes in that old photo the right shade of blue? Because the story of the man from Taured teaches us one terrifying truth. We are all just travelers, and we are all just one small vibration away from waking up in a world where no one has ever heard our names. The next time you walk through a crowded airport or a busy street and you feel a sudden dizzy spell, do not just keep walking. Stop. Look at the maps. Look at the people. Because you might just find that the world you left 5 minutes ago is not the world you are standing in now. If you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you have come to the right place. Because that is all we do here. We upload new stories every single week. So, if that is of interest to you, please offer to help the like button move their heavy furniture. But once you get the couch stuck in the doorway, just tell them you forgot something in the car. Drive away and block their number for the rest of eternity. Also, please subscribe and turn on all notifications so you do not miss any of our weekly uploads. Now, before we get into today's story, I want you to just take a second. Sit back. Really lean back into your chair. Let the weight of the world leave your shoulders. Grab yourself a fresh cup of coffee. Make it black. Make it strong. Or maybe a handful of peanuts. Because we are going to be here for a very long time. Today, we are looking at a story that challenges the very logic of the human mind. We like to think that we are in control of our own bodies. We believe that science can explain everything. But today's story is about a woman who became a battleground between two worlds. A story that ended with a courtroom trying to decide if the devil can be a legal defense. Are you ready? Good. Let's get into it. Imagine it is 1968. You are in Bavaria, West Germany. You are a bright, beautiful, and deeply religious 19-year-old girl named Annelies Michel. You are a university student. You have a future. You have a boyfriend. But then, the logic of your world begins to crack. It starts with a seizure. You find yourself unable to breathe, your body rigid as a board. The doctors call it epilepsy. They give you pills. They tell you, you will be fine. But the pills do nothing. Soon, you aren't just having seizures. You are having visions. You see the faces of demons staring at you from the shadows of your classroom. You smell the scent of rotting flesh whenever you enter a church. And then the voices start. They don't whisper. They scream. They tell you that you are damned. They tell you that the demons are hungry and they have chosen you as their host, the doctors increase the dosage. They tell you it is skizp. They say your brain is just misfiring. But you know that science is wrong, because science cannot explain why you suddenly have the strength of 4 grown men. Science cannot explain why you can speak in dead languages you never studied. And science definitely cannot explain why you have started to eat spiders. You and your family make a choice that will lead to one of the most controversial trials in history. You turn away from the doctors, you turn away from the hospitals, and you turn to the church. You ask for an exorcism, but you have no idea that the ritual intended to save your soul is about to destroy your body. Now, think about the dark, illogical progression of this situation. The year is 1975. Annalise Michel is no longer the beautiful university student she once was. She is a ghost of a human being. She weighs less than 70 pounds. Her eyes are sunken deep into her skull. Her knees are shattered from performing hundreds of genuflections, dropping to her knees repeatedly for hours on end. The church finally gives permission for the Ritual Romanum. 2 priests, Father Ernst Alt and Father Arnold Renz, enter the Michel home. They believe they are at war with the Prince of Darkness. But for the next 10 months, the logic of the modern world is replaced by a medieval nightmare. The priests perform 67 separate exorcisms. Some sessions last for 4 hours. During these rituals, Annalise is often chained to a chair or held down by her father. And then the voices change. It is no longer just demons. The voices identify themselves as Lucifer, Cain, Nero, and Judas Iscariot. And here is the part that defies all medical logic. Annalise stops eating. She says the demons will not allow her to consume food. She survives only on a few sips of water, and occasionally eating flies and spiders she finds on the floor. The logic of the human body says you should die in weeks. But Annalise continues to survive for months. She exhibits superhuman strength. During the rituals, she tosses grown men across the room like they are rag dolls. She barks like a dog for days. She screams in voices so deep and so distorted that the recordings still make people's skin crawl. 50 years later, her family stays in the house. They watch their daughter waste away. The logic of a parent says, "Call an ambulance. Get her a feeding tube. Save her life." But the Michel family and the priests believe they are saving her soul and that her body is a necessary sacrifice. By June of 1976, Annalise is dying. She has pneumonia. She has a high fever. Her face is covered in bruises from hitting herself, and her lips are cracked and bleeding. On her last night, she looks at her mother, and she whispers her final words. She says, "Mother, I am afraid." The next morning, July 1st, Annalise Michel is dead, but the end of her life was just the beginning of a legal and spiritual battle that would shock the entire world. Because when the police arrive, They don't see a girl who was saved by God. They see a girl who was starved to death while 4 adults just watched. Imagine the logic of a modern courtroom in 1978. The defendants are the 2 priests and Annalise's parents. The charge is negligent homicide. The prosecution says this is a simple case. They say, this was not the devil. This was a sick girl who needed a doctor, but was given a crucifix instead. But then the defense plays the tapes. There are over 40 audio recordings of the exorcisms. And as the sound fills the courtroom, the logic of the lawyers begins to stutter. You hear Annalise, a frail, 68-pound girl, speaking in a voice that sounds like it is coming from the bowels of the earth. She is speaking in perfect Latin and ancient Greek. She is describing things that a university student could not possibly know. The defense argues a terrifying point. They say, Annalise was not a victim of her parents. She was a voluntary sacrifice. They claim that Annalise had a vision of the Virgin Mary. They say she was given a choice. She could be healed, or she could continue to suffer to pay for the sins of the modern world. And according to the diary, she chose to suffer. But the medical experts are furious. They show the photos of Annalise's body on the day she died. They show her shattered knees. They show her empty stomach. They say, this is not a sacrifice. This is malpractice. They argue that if she had been given a single, simple injection of nutrition just 1 week before she died, she would still be alive. The jury is stunned. They are caught between 2 worlds. If they find the parents guilty, they are saying that faith is a crime. If they find them innocent, they are saying that you can let your child starve as long as you say the devil told you to. The tension in Germany reaches a breaking point. People are praying outside the courthouse, while others are protesting against the medieval influence of the church. The judge finally speaks, but his decision is not what anyone expected. He realizes that there is no logic that can bridge the gap between medical science and the screams on those tapes. But before the sentence is handed down, something even stranger happens. Because even in death, Annalise Michel was not finished. Even after the trial, the logic-defying events did not stop. 2 years after Annalise was buried, a nun claimed to have a vision. She said that Annalise's body had not rotted. She said the girl was incorruptible, a sign from God that she was a saint and not a victim of mental illness. In February of 1978, under the cover of darkness, the Michel family and the priests exhumed her body. They opened the coffin, hoping for a miracle. They wanted to show the world that even though she died, her body remained perfect, untouched by the grave. The official report says the body showed normal signs of decay. But the people who were there, the ones who saw her, they whispered a different story. They said she looked exactly as she did on the day she died. The trial finally ended. The parents and the priests were found guilty of negligent homicide, but the sentence defied all legal standards. They were given only 6 months in prison, and even that was suspended. The judge basically said, "You are guilty, but you have already suffered enough." Today, the grave of Annalise Michel is a place of pilgrimage. People from all over the world travel to that small town in Bavaria to pray and to leave flowers. But the question remains, and it is a question that science cannot answer. Was Annalise Michel a victim of a medical system that failed to understand her? Was she just a girl with epilepsy and schizophrenia who was talked into a nightmare by people she trusted? Or was she exactly what she said she was? A girl who stood at the gates of hell and fought a battle that we are too logical to understand. If you listen to the tapes, if you hear that voice, that gurgle, that scream of Judas, you have to ask yourself, can a human throat really make those sounds? Can a human mind invent that much? Hate. The next time you hear a floorboard creak or you feel a sudden icy chill in a place that should be warm, do not just tell yourself it is the air conditioning. Do not just trust in the logic of your eyes, because Annalise Michel proved that sometimes the thing that is screaming in the dark is not looking for a doctor. It is looking for a soul. If you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you have come to the right place. Because that is all we do here. We upload new stories every single week. So, if that is of interest to you, please offer to help the like button shovel the snow out of their driveway, but then deliberately pile all that snow right back in front of their garage door, so they are trapped inside for the rest of the winter. Also, please subscribe and turn on all notifications so you do not miss any of our weekly uploads. Now, before we get into today's story, I want you to just take a second, sit back. I mean, really lean back into your chair. Let the weight of the world leave your shoulders. Grab yourself a fresh cup of coffee, make it black, make it strong, or maybe a handful of peanuts, because we are going to be here for a very long time. Today, we are not just looking at a crime scene. We are looking at a house that could breathe, a house that watched, a house that invited a monster in for dinner and let him stay for dessert. Are you ready? Good. Let's get into it. Imagine it is March of 1922. You are in the heart of Bavaria, Germany. The air is so cold, it feels like it is trying to shatter your teeth. You live on a farm called Hinterkaifeck. It is a lonely, triangular piece of land surrounded by dark and thick woods. The nearest neighbor is almost a kilometer away. Out here, silence is not just a lack of noise, it is a physical presence. You are Andreas Gruber, the owner of this farm. You are a hard man, a man of routine. You do not believe in ghosts, and you certainly do not believe in fear. But one morning, as you step out onto your porch to start your chores, you see something that stops your heart. Mid-beat, in the fresh, white blanket of snow that fell overnight, there are tracks, human footprints. They start at the edge of the dark forest. They move with purpose, step by step, sinking deep into the powder, heading straight toward your machine shed. You follow them, your breath hitching in the frozen air. You check the shed. The door is slightly ajar. You check the barn. You check the house. And then you realize that the logic of the situation has just broken. You look back at the woods. You look at the tracks leading to your door. And you realize there are no return tracks. Someone or something walked from the forest into your home. And according to the snow, they never left. You do not tell your wife. You do not tell your daughter. You tell yourself it is just a prank, maybe a traveler. But that night, as the sun dips below the horizon and the house grows dark, you hear it above your head in the attic. Creak, creak, creak. It is not the wind. It is not the wood settling. It is the sound of rhythmic, human footsteps pacing back and forth directly above where you sleep. You grab your lantern, you grab your heavy tool, and you climb the stairs. You swing the attic door open, expecting to find a burglar or a drifter. But the attic is empty. There is nothing but dust and old crates. Yet, as you turn to leave, you notice a newspaper on the floor. A newspaper from the city. A city you have not visited in months. A newspaper that was not there yesterday. You look at the lock on the door. It has been tampered with. Someone has been watching you. Someone has been living in the spaces between your walls, listening to your conversations, smelling your food, and waiting for the exact moment when the standard life of the Gruber family would come to a violent, screaming end. But here is where the logic truly begins to defy us. Because Andreas Gruber did not call the police. He did not take his family and run to the neighbors. He stayed. He went back to bed. He chose to live in a house with an invisible guest. And that decision was the last mistake he would ever make. Now, for the next few days, from March 31st to April 1st, the world outside Hinterkaifeck began to notice a strange, heavy silence coming from the farm. It was like the entire property had been placed under a glass jar. The mail began to pile up in this small wooden box at the edge of the road. The local school noticed that 7-year-old Kazilia did not show up for class. Neighbors looked toward the farmhouse, and they saw smoke rising from the chimney, but they did not see a single soul moving in the yard. No one was hauling water. No one was tending to the horses. But inside that house, things were far from silent. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of Victoria, the daughter. You are a widow, a mother, trying to keep your family together in this isolated fortress of wood and stone. You have felt the eyes on the back of your neck for days. You have seen the terrified look in your father's eyes, the man who is never afraid. It is the evening of Friday, March 31st. The sun has just collapsed behind the tree line, leaving the farm in a bruising shade of purple and black. Suddenly, you hear a noise. It is coming from the barn. It is not the usual sound of restless livestock. It is a rhythmic thud, a sound of something being moved. You look at your mother. You look at your father. There is no more ignoring the guest in the attic. The intruder is not hiding in the shadows anymore. He is calling you. One by one, the family begins to walk toward the barn. Think about the logic here. Why wouldn't they go together? Why wouldn't they take a lantern and a gun out here in the year 1922? You are alone. Fear does strange things to the human brain. It makes you move in a trance. Your father goes first. He walks across the cold, muddy yard. The heavy barn door creaks as he swings it open. He steps into the darkness. He doesn't even have time to scream. Standing in the shadows, perfectly silent, perfectly prepared, is a figure holding a pickaxe. With one swift, overhead arc, the heavy iron blade finds its mark. Your father collapses into the hay, and the killer, he doesn't run. He doesn't panic. He simply drags the body into a corner, and he waits, because he knows the rest of you are coming. Your mother is next. She calls out for her husband. She steps into the same dark barn, her eyes searching the shadows. She sees a movement. She thinks it is Andreas. But before she can speak, the pickaxe swings again. Then it is your turn. Victoria, you walk into that barn with your young daughter, little Casilia, clutching your skirt. You walk into a slaughterhouse that smells of iron and old wood. You see the shapes in the corner. You see the glint of the metal. You die in the same spot as your parents. And your daughter, the person who did this, did not show mercy to a 7-year-old. She was struck down right there, next to the people who were supposed to protect her. But here is where the story moves from a tragedy to something deeply, deeply mysterious. The killer has now murdered 4 people in the barn, but there are still 2 people left in the house. The new maid, Maria, who had just arrived that very afternoon, and your youngest son, 2-year-old Joseph, who is sleeping peacefully in his crib. The killer leaves the barn. He walks back across the yard, his boots clicking on the frozen ground. He enters the kitchen. He walks past the warm stove. He heads straight for the maid's room. Maria never even got to unpack her bags. She was killed in her bed, a stranger in a house of death. And then the killer walks into the nursery. He looks down at 2-year-old Joseph. In a standard murder mystery, this is where the killer flees. He is finished with his gruesome work. He should be miles away before the sun comes up. But the person at Hinterkaifeck, he was not finished. He did not want to leave, because for the next 3 days, the lights at Hinterkaifeck would stay on. The chimney would continue to smoke. The cows would be fed. The bread would be eaten. The killer was no longer an intruder. He was the new master of the house. Now, I want you to really think about the logic of a crime. Usually, a killer wants 2 things. They want silence, and they want distance. They want to be as far away from the bodies as humanly possible before the sun rises. But the person at Hinterkaifeck, he was different. For the next 72 hours, while the bodies of the Gruber family lay cold and stiff in the barn, the farmhouse remained alive. Imagine you are a neighbor passing by on a Saturday morning. You look toward the farm. You see smoke curling lazily from the chimney. You think to yourself, oh, the Grubers are just having a quiet weekend. But inside, a monster was making himself at home. The killer did not just leave. He stayed. He walked into the kitchen, past the bloodstains, and he felt hungry. He sat at the family's table. He ate their bread. He drank their milk. He used their stove to cook himself a warm meal, while the people who owned that food were rotting just a few meters away. This is the part that defies everything we know about human psychology. The killer even tended to the farm. He went out to the barn, stepping over the bodies of Andreas, Kazilia, and Victoria, and he fed the cattle. He gave them water. He made sure the horses were cared for. Why was he trying to pretend everything was normal, or did he truly believe that he now owned this place? Think about the sheer, cold-blooded arrogance of it. On Sunday night, a neighbor saw a light moving in the yard. Someone was carrying a lantern. They assumed it was Andreas checking on the animals. But it was not Andreas. It was the man who had split Andreas's skull open only 48 hours prior. The killer was living a parallel life. He slept in their beds. He listened to the wind howling against the walls. He sat in the darkness, surrounded by the ghosts of the people he had just slaughtered. And for 3 whole days, no one knew. But on Tuesday, April 4th, the silence finally became too loud. A repairman named Michael Pohl arrived at the farm to fix a broken engine. He knocked on the door. No answer. He shouted. No answer. He spent hours working in the yard right outside the barn. He noticed the dog, the family's loyal guard dog, was tied up, barking frantically, looking thin and terrified. Michael finished his work and left, but he felt a chill in his spine. Something was wrong. Finally, the neighbors had seen enough. They gathered a group of men and walked toward the farmhouse. They pushed open the barn door, and the world changed forever. They found them, stacked like cordwood, covered in hay. And as the men stumbled back in horror, they noticed something that made their skin crawl. The kitchen was still warm. The table was set. The killer had escaped only minutes before they arrived. He had not been running for 3 days. He had been waiting. And as the police began to investigate, they realized the most terrifying truth of all. The killer did not need to break in. He did not need to force a window, because, according to the evidence, the monster had been living in that house long before the first drop of blood was ever spilled. The investigation into the Hinterkaifeck murders became one of the most frustrating and bizarre cases in history. The police questioned over 100 suspects. They looked at neighbors. They looked at drifters. They even looked at Victoria's husband, who was reported dead in World War I. Some people believed he had survived and came back to take revenge on the family that had moved on without him. But no one was ever charged. One of the main suspects was a neighbor named Lorenz S. Chietnbur. He was the one who led the search party. He was the one who pushed open the barn door. And, according to witnesses, he was the one who moved the bodies before the police arrived. Was he trying to help, or was he trying to hide? Evidence Schlittenbauer had a complicated history with Victoria. They had a child together, but Andreas, the father, did not approve. The logic says he had a motive, but there was never enough proof to lock him away. In the end, the police did something truly desperate. They sent the skulls of the Gruber family to see l'Arviens in the city. They hoped that psychics could talk to the dead and find the name of the killer. But the dead remained silent. The farmhouse at Hinterkaifeck was torn down a year later. The neighbors could not stand to look at it anymore. They wanted to bury the memory of the monster in the attic. But as the wooden beams were ripped apart and the walls were smashed, they found something that chilled them to the bone. In the insulation of the attic, they found hidden spaces. They found hollowed-out sections where a man could sit and watch the family below through the cracks in the ceiling. They found evidence that the guest had been there for weeks, maybe months. So, here is the question I want to leave you with. Tonight, when you turn off your lights and you hear a small creak in your ceiling, or when you find a window that you could have sworn you locked, but it is now slightly ajar, do not just assume it is the wind. Do not assume your mind is playing tricks on you, because sometimes the logic is wrong. Sometimes the shadows are not empty, and sometimes the guest in your attic is just waiting for you to fall asleep. If you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you have come to the right place. Because that is all we do here. We upload new stories every single week. So, if that is of interest to you, please offer to help the like button water their garden, but then, accidentally, leave the hose running until their entire basement is flooded, and then just wave goodbye and drive away. Also, please subscribe and turn on all notifications so you do not miss any of our weekly uploads. Now, before we get into today's story, I want you to just take a second, sit back. I mean, really lean back into your chair. Let the weight of the world leave your shoulders. Grab yourself a fresh cup of coffee, make it black, make it strong, or maybe a handful of peanuts, because we are going to be here for a very long time. Today, we are looking at a story about the price of a dream. We are taught that if we work hard and save our money, we can buy a piece of paradise, a place where our children can run free, a place where we can finally exhale. But today's story proves that sometimes your dream house has already chosen its own master. Are you ready? Good. Let's get into it. Imagine it is June of 2014. You are Derek Broaddus. You have worked your whole life to buy this moment. You just closed on a $1.3 million home at 657 Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey. It is a beautiful 6-bedroom colonial house. It is perfect. You are at the house alone, doing some light painting, before your wife and 3 children move in. It is a warm, quiet evening. You walk out to the mailbox, expecting to find utility bills or junk mail, but instead you find a thick, white envelope. There is no return address. The handwriting is strange. It is blocky and aggressive. You open it, and as you read the first line, the warmth of the summer evening disappears. The letter says, "Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood." It sounds friendly at first, but then the logic begins to shift. The letter continues, 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now. My grandfather watched the house in the 19-20s. My father watched it in the 19-60s. And now it is NY time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out. Your heart begins to hammer against your ribs. You look around the quiet street. You see neighbors mowing their lawns. You see people walking their dogs. Everything looks normal, but the letter gets more personal. It says, "I see you have brought young blood to the house. Was that your plan? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me." The writer calls himself the Watcher. You think it is a prank, a sick joke from a jealous neighbor. You call the police. They tell you it is probably nothing, just someone being weird. But a few days later, another letter arrives, and this time, the Watcher knows things that no one should know. He knows the nicknames you call your children inside the house. He knows which room is the nursery. He knows what time you go to bed. And he asks a terrifying question. Have they found what is in the walls? Yet? In time, they will. I am pleased to know your names now, and the name of the young blood you have brought to me. The logic of your safety is gone. You haven't even moved in yet, and you realize you are not just buying a house. You are being invited into a trap. Now, I want you to imagine the paranoia that starts to rot your brain. You are Derek Broaddus. You have spent your life savings on this house. But now, you cannot even bring your children inside the front door. You are staying in a hotel or with relatives while you go to the house alone every day to work on the renovations. But you are not working anymore. You are standing by the windows, peering through the blinds. You are watching the neighbors. You see the elderly couple, the Langfords, who live next door. They have a porch that looks directly into your sunroom. The Watcher's letter said, I see you in the sunroom. You are painting. The logic is crushing you. If someone can see you in the sunroom, they must be right there. You look at the Langfords. Are they the Watcher? They have lived there since the 19-60s. That matches the letter. But then you look at the house on the other side. You see a man sitting in a lawn chair, just staring at your house. He doesn't wave. He doesn't smile. He just watches. You hire private investigators. You hire former FBI agents. You spend thousands of dollars trying to find a ghost. They tell you the DNA on the envelopes belongs to a woman You look at every woman on the street with new, terrified eyes. Is it the lady who walks her dog every morning at 7 a.m.? Is it the grandmother who brings you cookies with a fake smile? Then the third letter arrives. This one is aggressive. It says, 657 Boulevard is turning into a construction site. I do not like what you are doing to the house. You are making it ugly. And then the letter asks about your children. Again, the young blood, they haven't come to play in the basement yet. Why are you keeping them away? The house is lonely. It needs them. The logic of the neighborhood is now a nightmare. You go to the police. Again, you demand action. They question the neighbors. They do DNA swabs. They look at everyone, but they find nothing. No fingerprints. No digital trail. The watcher is a phantom who knows the layout of your home better than you do. He mentions the dumbwaiter, a small elevator for food inside the walls. He says, I am glad you found the dumbwaiter. It is a good place to hide, isn't it? You didn't even know there was a dumbwaiter until you ripped down a wall that morning. Think about that for a second. The watcher knew what was behind your walls before you did. You start to think, maybe the house. IS alive. Maybe the letters are coming from the inside. You decide you cannot move in. You try to sell the house, but the news has leaked. Everyone in the country knows about the watcher. No one wants to buy a house that is being stalked by a shadow. You are trapped. You own a $1.3 million coffin, and as you sit in the dark of your empty living room, you hear a sound in the basement, a heavy, slow thump, and you realize the watcher isn't just watching. He is waiting for you to break. Now, here is where the story defies all human sympathy. You are Derek Broaddus. You are living a nightmare. You have lost your money. You have lost your peace of mind. And you are terrified for your children. But as the weeks turn into months, the neighborhood starts to turn against you. Think about the twisted logic of a small town. The neighbors, the people who were supposed to be your friends, they start to whisper. They say, isn't it strange? No one else ever got a letter. Only the Broaddus family. They start to form a theory that is as cold as the letters themselves. They think you are the watcher. They believe you bought a house you couldn't afford. They think you had buyer's remorse and you created a monster to get out of the contract. They think you wrote those terrifying words about your own children just to sue the previous owners or to get a movie deal. Can you imagine the pure agony of that? You are being stalked by a phantom, and now the world thinks you are the phantom. The police, under pressure from the town, start to look at you differently. They look at your handwriting. They look at your bank accounts. They find nothing, but the damage is done. You are now an outcast in your own dream. You decide to take a stand. You apply to the town board to tear down the house. You want to smash 657 Boulevard into dust. You want to divide the land and build 2 new houses. You think, if I destroy the house, I destroy the Watcher. But the town says, no. They say the house is historic. They say it would ruin the look of the street. They choose the bricks and mortar of a building over the safety of your family. And then a new letter arrives. But this one is not like the others. This one is personal in a way that makes your blood turn to icy. The Watcher says, the house is crying. It doesn't like what you are doing. You are trying to kill it. But the house cannot be killed. I am still here. I am always here. And I am watching to see who will be the first to crack. You realize, then, that you are not just fighting a person. You are fighting an obsession. You have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on lawyers and security guards and investigators. You are broke. You are broken. And as you look at the beautiful $1.3 million home, you realize it is no longer a house. It is a predator, and it has already devoured your life. But the biggest shock is still to come, because years later, when you finally manage to rent the house to someone else, someone who doesn't believe in ghosts, the letters stop. For the new tenants, there is silence. Why? Did the Watcher finally get what he wanted? Or was he just waiting for a new game to begin? In 2019, 5 years after the nightmare began, Derek and Maria Broaddus finally sold the house. They sold it for $9,150,000. That is a loss of over $400,000, not counting the money they spent on private investigators and lawyers. They lost a fortune just to escape a shadow. But the mystery of the Watcher remains unsolved. The police investigated everyone. They looked at the Langfords, the elderly neighbors. They looked at a man who used to walk his dog past the house every day. They even looked at local history buffs who were obsessed with the architecture of Westfield. They found nothing. No DNA matches. No confessions. No mistakes. The Watcher was a master of the invisible. He, or SHE, managed to terrorize a family, destroy their finances, and ruin their reputation without ever leaving a single physical trace. And here is the part that defies all standard logic. The new family that moved into 657 Boulevard, they have not received a single letter. Is it because the Watcher is gone? Or is it because the goal was never to destroy the house, but to destroy the people inside it? Think about that for a second. Today, Derek Broaddus is a man who is still looking over his shoulder. He says that the experience was like a house fire that never stops burning. He realized that in the modern world, we think we have privacy. We think our walls are our shields. But the Watcher proved that if someone is patient enough and obsessed enough, they can own your soul without ever touching your skin. So, as we finish today's story, I want you to do me a favor. Tonight, when you go home and you pull into your driveway, before you get out of your car, I want you to just look at your house. Look at the windows. Look at the shadows in the attic. Look at the spaces between the bricks. And ask yourself, am I the one who is truly in charge of this home? Or is there someone in a house, across the street, or in a car at the end of the block who knows your children's names? Someone who knows what room you sleep in. Someone who is watching. Because, as the family at 657 Boulevard learned the hard way, sometimes the most expensive thing you will ever buy is the thing that will eventually cost you everything. If you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you have come to the right place. Because that is all we do here. We upload new stories every single week. So, if that is of interest to you, please offer to help the like button move into their new apartment. But when they ask you to carry the heavy dresser up 3 flights of stairs, just accidentally drop it, then run away and never answer their calls again. Also, please subscribe and turn on all notifications so you do not miss any of our weekly uploads. Now, before we get into today's story, I want you to just take a second, sit back. I mean, really lean back into your chair. Let the weight of the world leave your shoulders. Grab yourself a fresh cup of coffee, make it black, make it strong, or maybe a handful of peanuts, because we are going to be here for a very long time. Today, we are looking at a story that challenges the very logic of family. We are told that a mother's love is a superpower. We are told that a sister would know her brother's face anywhere in the world. But what if the person you love comes back from the dead, but they have the wrong eyes, and the wrong voice, and the wrong soul? Are you ready? Good. Let's get into it. Imagine it is June of 19-9-4. You are in San Antonio, Texas. You have a 13-year-old son named Nicholas Barkley. He is a rebellious kid, a bit of a troublemaker, but he is yours. One afternoon, he goes out to play basketball with his friends, and he never comes home. For 3 years, your life is a living hell. You put up posters. You call the police. You cry yourself to sleep every single night, wondering if he is cold, if he is hungry, or if he is gone. The logic of the situation says a 13-year-old boy doesn't just vanish into thin air without a trace. But for 3 years, there is silence. And then, in October of 19-9-7, the phone rings. It is the police. But they are not in Texas. They are in Spain. They tell you they have found a young man huddled in a phone booth, terrified. He says he is Nicholas Barkley. He says he was kidnapped by a global child trafficking ring. He says he just wants to go home. Your heart explodes with joy. You send your daughter, Carrie, to Spain to bring him back. Imagine the scene at the airport. Carrie sees him for the first time in 3 years. He looks different. His hair is darker. He looks traumatized. But she hugs him. She cries. She says, I found you. I finally found you. But as they get on the plane, the logic begins to crumble. You see, Nicholas Barkley was a blue-eyed, blonde-haired kid from Texas. But the boy sitting next to Carrie has dark brown eyes. And he speaks with a thick French accent. He is 23 years old, pretending to be 16. His name is Frederick Burden, a world-class con artist known as the Imposter. And here is the part that defies all human understanding. Frederick is terrified. He thinks, the moment we land in Texas, they will know. They will see my brown eyes. They will hear my French accent. They will call the police, and I will go to jail. But when the plane lands in San Antonio, and the family sees him, they don't scream. They don't call the police. They embrace him. They take him home. They give him Nicholas's bed. They give him Nicholas's clothes. They treat him like he was never gone. And Frederick is sitting in that house, thinking, how is this possible? How can a mother not know that I am not her son? The answer is much, much darker than he ever imagined. Imagine the psychological trap that Frederick Burden has walked into. He is a professional con artist. He has spent his life pretending to be people he is not. He expected a challenge. He expected to have to lie and manipulate every single second just to survive. But instead, he finds a family that is helping him lie. Think about the logic here. Nicholas Barkley had blue eyes. Frederick has brown eyes. Frederick tells the family that his kidnappers, in a secret laboratory, changed his eye color using a chemical injection. It is a ridiculous story. It sounds like a bad science fiction movie. But the mother, Beverly, just nods. She says, "Oh, my poor baby. Look what they did to you." She doesn't ask for a DNA test. She doesn't call a doctor. She just accepts the impossible. Frederick starts to feel a chill in his spine. He is living in Nicholas's bedroom. He is eating at their table. But every time he looks at Nicholas's brother, Jason, he sees something that terrifies him. Jason doesn't look happy. Jason looks guilty. Every time Frederick mentions the day Nicholas disappeared, the room goes ice cold. Now, enter a private investigator named Charlie Parker. Charlie is a man of facts. He doesn't believe in miracles. He looks at the photos of the real Nicholas, and he looks at the man sitting in the Barkley house. He sees the ears. Did you know that your ERS are as unique as your fingerprints? Charlie notices that Frederick's ears do not match the boy in the photos. He contacts the FBI. He tells them, "This man in Texas is not Nicholas Barkley. He is an imposter. He is a fraud." The FBI begins to move in. They want a DNA test. Frederick knows the game is over. He is trapped. He thinks the family will turn on him. He thinks they will demand justice for the real Nicholas. But instead, the family starts to fight the FBI. They refuse the DNA test. They tell the agents to leave their son alone. They are protecting Frederick like a mother bird protecting her nest. Frederick is sitting in his room, realizing a horrifying truth. He thought he was the one playing a game. He thought he was the predator, and they were the prey. But as he looks at the faces of the Barkley family, he starts to wonder, are they accepting me because they love Nicholas? Or are they accepting me because as long as I am Nicholas, then in 01 will ever ask what really happened to the boy who disappeared in 19-9-4. The logic is shifting. The con artist is becoming the witness. He realizes he is not hiding from the police in this house. He is hiding from a family that might be far more dangerous than he is. The FBI is not like a grieving family. They do not believe in miracles, and they certainly do not believe in chemical eye injections. Agent Nancy Fisher looks at Frederick, and she sees a grown man. She doesn't see a 16-year-old boy. She sees the stubble on his face. She hears the French rhythm in his voice. She knows, with 100% certainty, that this is a fraud. She forces the issue. The court orders a DNA test. Frederick is cornered. He knows the game is dead. He realizes that if the DNA test happens, he is going to a federal prison for a very long time. So he does something truly desperate. He calls Charlie Parker, the private investigator. He says, I want to talk, but not about me. I want to talk about the family. Frederick tells Charlie, you are looking for Nicholas? You want to know where he is? Stop looking at me. Look at the brother, Jason. Look at the mother, Beverly. Ask them why they let me stay. Ask them why they were so happy to accept a stranger with the wrong eyes. Frederick's logic was cold and terrifying. He believed that the Barkley family had murdered the real Nicholas back in 19-9-4. He believed that they had buried him somewhere on that property. And when Frederick arrived from Spain, they didn't see a miracle. They saw an opportunity. If Frederick is Nicholas, then Nicholas is not dead. If Nicholas is alive, then there is no murder. No murder means no investigation. No investigation means they are safe. Frederick, the predator, was now claiming to be the prey. He was telling the police, I am a liar. Yes, but they are killers. They are using me as a human shield to hide a body that has been rotting for 3 years. The FBI finally gets the DNA results. The report is clear. It is absolute. There is zero match. The man in the house is Frederick Bourdon, a 23-year-old French national. He is arrested and handcuffed right there in the living room. But as they lead him away, Frederick looks back at the family. He expected them to be furious. He expected them to scream, Where is our real son? What did you do with him? But instead, they were silent. Beverly, the mother, just watched him go. Her eyes were empty. There was no anger. There was no shock. It was as if she had just finished a business transaction. The FBI now turns their focus back to the house, back to 19-9-4. They bring in the cadaver dogs. They bring in the ground-penetrating radar. They begin to dig in the Texas dirt. looking for the real Nicholas Barkley. And then the logic takes one last dark turn. Jason, the older brother, the one who Frederick said was the most guilty, suddenly and tragically dies. An overdose. Some say it was an accident. Others say it was a way to take the secrets to the grave. With Jason gone, the only person who might have known the truth was silenced. Frederick Burden was sentenced to 6 years in a federal prison. For a con artist, that is a heavy price. But for Frederick, prison was the only place where he finally felt safe. Because for the months he spent inside the Texas home, he wasn't just a predator playing a game. He was a witness, trapped inside a house that smelled like a graveyard. The FBI continued to dig. They searched the backyard. They searched the woods. They searched every inch of the Barkley property. They were looking for the bones of a 13-year-old boy who went to play basketball and never came back. But they found nothing. To this day, Nicholas Barkley is still listed as a missing person. No body has ever been found. No one has ever been charged with his murder. But think about the dark, twisted logic of what happened. Beverly, the mother, still maintains that she truly believed Frederick was her son. She says she was just a grieving mother, blinded by hope. But Frederick tells a different story. He says that one night, while they were alone, he looked at one of the family members and said, "You know I am not Nicholas, don't you?" And the answer he got was a silent, terrifying smile. They didn't need him to be Nicholas. They just needed him to act as a shield. Because as long as there was a Nicholas in that house, the police would stop looking for a body. It is a story that defies every law of family and love. We want to believe that a mother's instinct is infallible. We want to believe that a family is a sanctuary. But the case of Nicholas Barkley proves that sometimes a family is a fortress built to protect a monster. So, tonight, as you look at the people you love, the people you think you know better than anyone else, I want you to ask yourself, what would I be willing to believe to hide a terrible truth? Because sometimes the person returning from the shadows is a liar, but the people who open the door and invite him in might be much, much worse. Frederick Burden eventually went back to Europe. He continues to live his life as a man of 1,000 faces. But the real Nicholas Barkley remains a ghost in the Texas wind. A boy who was lost twice. Once to a stranger, and once to his own family. SDHJD MP3